Hey, thank you so much for joining me at 10 Minute Apologetics. I am really excited to continue our discussion. And when you come down to apologetics and just this whole idea of God's existence, it comes down to three main arguments, two of which we've gone over. And there are other arguments too, but honestly, they're a lot harder to understand and frame. And I'm really trying to keep things as simple as possible. And honestly, some of them are even they're hard for me to understand. You could look up the ontological argument for God's existence. To me, it doesn't make sense. So I'm going to share what does make sense and what I think is very clear. And the first I've shared already, that's the cosmological argument. That's been popularized and best articulated by William Lane Craig. In my opinion, the best Christian philosopher of our time right now. And there's other good ones. But he debates atheists, and probably the most popular and strongest atheist. He's afraid of nobody. They're more afraid of him, and they should be. But the Kalam cosmological argument, it's called Kalam because it originated actually with Muslim scholars over 1,000 years ago, I think. But it originated with them, and he has repopularized it. But to me, it seems like a very airtight case. Premise one, everything that begins to exist has a cause of its existence. Premise two, the universe began to exist. Therefore, conclusion, the universe had a cause of its existence. And I made that argument in episode 6 and kind of fleshed it out a little bit more. So the most important part is somebody that you bring this up with, especially if they're like kind of a stronger atheist, they might say, well, who's to say? Sure, the universe had a cause. Great. Who's to say this cause is God? Well, if the universe, and this is what science tells us, is the beginning of time and space, then whatever caused the universe to come to be into being would be timeless, spaceless, and immaterial. He couldn't be part of what he created. Does that make sense? In addition, he must be unimaginably powerful to have created the effect of causing the universe to come into being. And finally, he must be personal, because only persons or personal minds can make decisions and have a will to decide. He decided to create the universe. He could have decided not to create the universe, but he decided to, which shows that he has a personal mind and that he is personal. So this does seem to describe God. Another objection might be, well, sure, it shows that there's some kind of God or higher power out there, but who's to say this is the Christian God? Well, this argument doesn't go that far, and there are other arguments. I shared evidence for the resurrection. There's other arguments that show and lead us to the Christian God, but it does show that theism, a belief in a personal God, is much more rationally tenable than atheism, which atheism doesn't make any sense in my opinion. The second argument I shared was the moral argument. And the moral argument, also I'm going to frame it the way William Lane Craig frames it, is premise one, if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Premise two, objective moral values and duties do exist. Premise three, therefore God exists. So are there such a thing? Is it defensible? Under premise one, can objective moral values and duties exist without God existing? No. There's no standard above humanity that ultimately we can say this person or this thing is the standard that decides what is right and wrong. People might try to root or set as a foundation of objective moral values as evolution. And evolution sets objective moral values, and that's why we love each other, want to protect each other, and this and that. But there's still a problem. It doesn't say who says what is right and what is wrong. I mean, Hitler used evolution to want to kill millions of Jews to purify the human race, survival of the fittest. That's what he subscribed to. In fact, a lot of atheistic dictators and murderers who are responsible for over 100 million deaths just in the 20th century subscribed to atheism and evolution to defend what they believed. But even if that were true, it would not lead us to moral duties. In other words, you could say objective moral values exist from evolution. That would be wrong. But even if you said that, it wouldn't lead us. Duties are what we ought to do. It's the problem, and atheists see this problem, going from the moral is, what is right and wrong, to what we then ought to do. Because under naturalism and atheism, it basically tells me that all I am is a bunch of chemical reactions that somehow, very fortunately, created my body, made me who I am, and now all the decisions that I make and the free will that I supposedly have are non-existent. In fact, there's plenty of great atheists who've made good arguments against human free will. In fact, if all I am is a bunch of chemical reactions going off, if all my brain is a biological machine, then free will is an illusion. And then saying what I ought to do is just absolute complete nonsense. It makes no sense. I mean, I can't do anything different than my programming programs me to do, any more than a computer program can somehow decide to do something different than what it has been programmed to do. It may seem like that sometimes for you, or me too. But no, it's just following programming. And we would be doing the same thing under atheism, but God has given us free will, and therefore there are things that we ought to do. In other words, we could have done something different. We have real choices that we can make. And if I do something evil, I should have done something good. Under atheism, you can't even say anything like that because it doesn't make any sense in an atheistic worldview. So if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. Objective moral values and duties do exist. So that's the question. Do they exist? But I think in our humanity, I think we all generally acknowledge that yes, and even though we may not agree on these things, there are some things that are just good in and of themselves, and other things, actions, beliefs, that are evil. We believe that slavery in the 17th and 18th centuries in America, early America, ripping people out of their homes in Africa, putting them on boats and shipping them off as property to wealthy people in America, that was evil. And it doesn't matter if anyone else thought it was good. It doesn't matter what time period it happened in and what culture felt about it. It was an evil thing. Rape against a woman's will, which is kind of the definition of it, is always evil. It doesn't matter if this was 6,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, in a culture that believed differently. That culture was objectively wrong. If you don't believe that, then you believe in subjective moral truth, and I think we have some problems there. So anyway, this leads to God's existence. Our final argument is called the teleological argument, and that sounds complicated, but I'll give you an easier word for it. It's called the argument from design. We see design and purpose, and as human beings, I'm just introducing this now, but human beings see design and purpose in so many things. It's something that we just intuitively grasp. In other words, if you see, I go hiking all the time, and I might come across a pile of stones. Those are called cairn stones, but when you see these stones carefully piled up on each other, do you imagine that millions of years of erosion or maybe a tornado blowing through stack these stones up? No. Even something as simple as that, you just have an intuition that a human being, a mind, planned and had a purpose and design in stacking one stone on top of another. And that's a very simple thing. There are things that we just recognize are designed. If you look at the globe behind me, you can tell that it was arranged and thought about, and you see countries that match what we know where countries are on globes. You can see the roundness of it, the shininess of it, screws going in, it tilted on its axis 12.5 degrees. You see all these things and you just naturally can tell that it's designed. When you look at a page in a book and you see letters that are arranged in a certain order to make words, and words arranged in a certain order to make sentences, and punctuation and all the syntax and grammar of our English language, you can tell that those are put together in a very specific order and that there was a mind behind those things. It's intuitive. We don't think about it. When you look at a computer or you look at a 747, the famous example is, you don't look at a 747 and somehow imagine that a tornado flew through a junkyard and put together a 747. You know that a human mind conceptualized it, and they tested it, and they planned it, and they put it together. You don't think about that. It's natural. The question then is, can we apply those same intuitive principles when we look at the natural world and see design in that as well? We know humans write books, so we know that there are human minds behind those books. But when we don't see the mind behind it, that mind being God, can we still detect design? Are there principles that we can use from our everyday life that we can then apply to maybe the origin of the universe or the laws of physics that govern the universe? Yes. Or inside our bodies and our DNA and the way that our bodies are put together. Let me just say the Bible in Psalm 139, one of my favorite passages, in the NIV, it says that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. And in the New Living Translation, it says, "Thank you for making me so marvelously complex." So I can't wait to get more into this and share it with you. God bless you. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day.